You made a quiet choice that felt heavy the moment you made it. You stopped answering. You put the phone down. You let the silence sit between you. And instead of feeling relief, you felt a strange kind of exhaustion mixed with doubt. You wondered if you were being cruel. You questioned whether leaving things unspoken was the wrong way to end it. You replayed conversations in your head, looking for the moment you should have explained yourself better, the moment you should have given them one more chance to hear you out. But the truth is simpler than the doubt makes it feel. You did not walk away because you were cold or selfish. You walked away because staying meant slowly losing yourself. You walked away because every conversation had become a loop. Every attempt to be understood was turned into a debate, and every boundary you set was treated as a negotiation you were losing. That kind of emotional drain does not happen by accident. It happens in relationships where one person carries the weight of reality while the other person constantly shifts the ground beneath it. You were never the problem. The problem was a dynamic built on imbalance, where your patience was treated as permission to cross lines, and your empathy was used as a tool to keep you engaged long after you should have stepped back. What you are experiencing now is not guilt over a mistake. It is the nervous system adjusting to a sudden change in pressure. And what happens next is not random. It follows a clear psychological pattern. When you disappear from someone who relies on control and emotional predictability, you are not just removing yourself from their day. You are removing a source of regulation. For a person with strong narcissistic traits, your attention, your reactions, and even your distress serve as emotional supply. That does not mean they are consciously calculating every move. It means their sense of stability has become tied to how you respond to them. Your silence breaks that loop. It creates what psychologists call a narcissistic injury. That term simply means a deep disruption to their self-image and sense of control. When that injury happens, the mind does not process it with reflection or accountability. It processes it as a threat, and the response to a threat is never calm or consistent. It shifts through phases, and each phase is designed to restore access, restore control, or restore the narrative that keeps them in a position of power. Understanding this does not excuse the behavior. It removes the mystery. It helps you see the pattern clearly, so you stop blaming yourself for reactions that were never about you. The first phase you will likely notice is testing. After the initial silence, there is usually a quiet period where nothing happens. That quiet is not peace. It is assessment. In those hours or days, the person is calculating how far the silence will stretch and whether it is permanent or just a pause. If they believe it is temporary, they will wait. If they suspect it is final, they will reach out. The first contact is rarely aggressive. It is usually designed to look harmless. A simple message, checking in, a question that seems casual, a reference to something you used to share. On the surface, it looks like normal human connection. Underneath, it is a boundary test. They are checking whether your silence is real, or whether you are still emotionally available beneath the quiet. If you respond, even with a polite decline, the system receives a signal that access is still possible. That is why these early messages often feel so reasonable. They are not trying to win you back through honesty. They are trying to open the door with the least amount of resistance. When you feel the pull to reply, remember that the pull is not proof that something was real. It is proof that your empathy is being activated on schedule. When testing does not work, the approach usually shifts to escalation. This is the phase where the messages change tone or frequency. You might notice a sudden increase in contact. You might see messages that swing between warmth and urgency. There may be claims of sudden stress, unexpected crises, or memories that feel carefully chosen to trigger your sense of care. This is not manipulation in the theatrical sense. It is a psychological strategy rooted in urgency. When calm access fails, urgency becomes the tool. The mind under threat will often create or amplify emergencies to bypass rational boundaries. If you have a history of stepping up during hard times, your nervous system is already wired to respond to distress. That wiring is what gets activated here. You might feel a rush of responsibility. You might worry that ignoring them is cruel. You might start questioning whether your silence is causing real harm. But genuine distress does not require you to abandon your own peace. Real emergencies do not depend on your emotional labor to resolve themselves. The urgency you are feeling is designed to override your logic. The shift from testing to escalation is predictable because it relies on a simple mechanism. People who lose control often try to regain it by making themselves seem indispensable. You do not need to rescue someone who only reaches out when your boundaries threaten their comfort. If escalation fails to pull you back in, the pattern often moves into a third phase, where the tone changes again. This is where you may notice indirect pressure, frustration, or a subtle shift toward blame. The messages might become shorter, colder, or more pointed. There may be accusations that you are being unfair, that you are punishing them, or that you never really cared. Sometimes this phase appears as a sudden withdrawal on their end, designed to make you feel like you lost something valuable. Other times it appears as a quiet campaign to reshape how others see you. Mutual friends may hear vague comments. Social circles may receive carefully framed narratives that paint you as the one who walked away without reason. This is not about truth. It is about narrative control. When direct access is gone, the next step is to protect the ego by adjusting the story. If the story becomes one where you are the source of the problem, the person no longer has to face the reality of what they lost, or why they lost it. It is a defense mechanism, plain and simple. It can feel deeply unfair to watch your character be quietly questioned by people who were never part of the dynamic, but recognizing it for what it is removes its power. You do not need to correct every rumor. You do not need to prove your innocence to people who are not experiencing the full picture. You only need to stay anchored in what you know to be true. The truth is that you stepped back from a pattern that was draining you. That is not cruelty. That is self-preservation. Beyond the direct contact and the narrative shifts, there is often a fourth layer that operates quietly in the background. This is the phase of indirect presence. You may notice them interacting with your online spaces. You may see them liking old posts, viewing your stories, or appearing in places you frequent. You may hear through friends that they are doing well, or that they have moved on quickly, or that they are suddenly surrounded by new connections. None of this is accidental. It is visibility management. When someone cannot reach you directly, they will try to remain visible in your periphery. The goal is not reconciliation. The goal is to keep a thread of attention alive without having to meet your boundaries. It is a low-effort way to maintain psychological proximity. It can feel confusing because it does not come with a direct request. It just sits there, waiting for you to notice. When you notice it, you might start wondering if there is still a chance, or if they are actually changing. But presence without accountability is not progress. Visibility without respect for your limits is not healing. It is a holding pattern, and you do not have to live inside a holding pattern that costs you your peace. As you move through these phases, the most important shift happens inside you. It is not a sudden moment of victory. It is a quiet realization that the pattern is no longer a mystery. You start to see that the messages, the urgency, the coldness, the visibility, the rumors. They are not random reactions to your silence. They are predictable responses to a loss of control. Once you see the pattern clearly, your nervous system begins to downshift. You stop scanning for hidden meanings. You stop trying to decode every message. You stop wondering what you could have said differently to make it easier. You realize that no amount of explaining would have changed the dynamic, because the dynamic was never built on mutual understanding. It was built on access. And when access is removed, the system reacts exactly as it was designed to react. That realization does not make the experience pleasant, but it does make it manageable. You can step back emotionally because you finally understand that you are not dealing with a person who is confused about what happened. You are dealing with a person who is reacting to the loss of a familiar emotional structure. You do not owe that structure your continued presence. Clarity brings a different kind of responsibility. It brings the responsibility to hold your boundary without apology. Holding a boundary does not mean you become cold or punitive. It means you stop participating in a cycle that has proven itself harmful. Calm detachment is not indifference. It is the conscious choice to stop feeding a pattern that thrives on your emotional engagement. When you stop reacting, you remove the fuel. When you stop explaining, you stop handing over your energy to a conversation that will never reach mutual ground. When you stop checking, you stop giving the past permission to dictate your present. This is not about punishment. It is about preservation. Self-respect is not a loud declaration. It is the quiet decision to treat your own peace as non-negotiable. You do not need to announce your boundaries to be protected by them. You just need to live by them consistently. The moment you stop treating their reactions as your responsibility, you reclaim your emotional space. That space is where healing actually begins. Healing in this context does not look like sudden joy. It looks like steady reduction in tension. It looks like waking up and not immediately checking your phone. It looks like sitting through a quiet evening without feeling the need to justify your choices to anyone. It looks like recognizing that guilt is often just a leftover signal from a system that trained you to prioritize someone else's comfort over your own well-being. You will notice that your thoughts slow down. You will notice that you stop rehearsing conversations that will never happen. You will notice that your energy returns to things that do not require you to defend your reality. That is not closure handed to you by someone else. That is closure you build by refusing to return to a space that asked you to shrink yourself. Moving forward does not require you to forgive the damage before you are ready. It only requires you to stop waiting for an apology that will not change the pattern. You do not need their validation to know that your decision was necessary. You already have the evidence in your own nervous system. You have the proof in the exhaustion you carried. You have the clarity in the relief that comes when you finally stop trying to manage someone else's emotional instability. There will be days when the doubt returns. That is normal. Your brain spent a long time trying to solve a puzzle that had no solution. It will take time for that habit to fade. When the doubt comes, you do not need to fight it with force. You just need to acknowledge it and return to what you know to be true. You know that you were asked to carry more than your share. You know that your boundaries were treated as obstacles. You know that your empathy was used to keep you engaged long after you should have stepped back. Those facts do not change because someone sends a message or because someone tries to rewrite the story. You do not need to prove your experience to anyone who was not living it. You only need to honor it yourself. That is how you rebuild trust in your own judgment. You start making decisions based on your well-being instead of your fear of being misunderstood. You start valuing consistency over intensity. You start choosing quiet stability over dramatic cycles. That is how you step out of survival mode and into actual living. What you can expect when you finally go silent is not a single event. It is a sequence of predictable reactions designed to test, pull, redirect, or rewrite. None of it requires your participation to be valid. None of it demands your response to be real. You do not need to decode it. You do not need to manage it. You just need to let it happen without handing your attention back to it. The silence you created is not a weapon. It is a boundary. And boundaries do not exist to hurt people. They exist to protect the person who finally realized they have been carrying too much for too long. You did the right thing by stepping back. You did the right thing by choosing your peace over their comfort. You did the right thing by refusing to stay in a dynamic that asked you to lose yourself in order to keep it functioning. The path forward is simple. Keep your attention on your own life. Keep your energy directed toward things that nourish you instead of drain you. Keep your standards clear enough that you never again mistake intensity for intimacy or urgency for care. You do not need to prove anything. You only need to continue living in alignment with the truth you finally recognized. And when you do, the noise fades, the doubt settles, the exhaustion lifts. What remains is not bitterness or regret. It is quiet strength, clear boundaries, and the steady confidence that comes from knowing you finally chose yourself.